Last time we did all about desire, Rotzen, and if you remember the Rotzen, we said the desire is the same gematria, the same numerical value as the word for makor and source, and we spoke about the fact that that is the root of our inner knowledge, really. And the way that we can connect to that inner knowledge is by identifying what is our true Rotzen, what is that true desire, that underlying will and passion that we have, which is driving and motivating us. That is going to be our inner knowledge, what is part of really sort of our inner core or inherent self-identity. Now, the next part what Rabbi Tatz does is actually explain tefillah in this context. This is a really beautiful piece, actually, because we're now going to sort of bring it, I was about to say down to earth. It's kind of down to earth, but still quite spiritual, but in the sense that now we're going to take some of the ideas that we've learned and relate it to tefillah. So it's very, very exciting. Page 100 at the top, desire and the depth of prayer. The exercise which most directly develops this contact with the root of desire, that means us being able to connect with the root of our innermost desire, Ratzon, is tefillah, is prayer. In order to understand this, let's ask some fundamental questions about prayer. Okay, these may be questions that you're familiar with, but the approach to answer them is certainly going to be new. There are aspects of prayer which seem to defy explanation. Our prayers are phrased as requests. We ask the Creator for our needs. This is an essential element of prayer. Okay, we have Shevach. We start off every single Amida with praise of Hashem. Then we have Bakoshas, which is the middle section, which is request. And then we have Hoda'ah, which is thanks as well. And we do that in every single Amida, even though the Amida on Shabbos and Yom Tov is different, and on Yom Kippur and on Rosh Hashanah, they're all different, but nevertheless, they all follow the same format. So Bakosha, the idea of request, is an essential element. The difficulty is, how can we hope to achieve anything by asking? Surely Hashem knows what we need before we ask. And being a loving Father, surely He will give us our needs, even if we do not ask. Meaning, what's this idea of asking? If Hashem loves us, and Hashem is our Father, and Hashem knows what we need, then He's going to give us anyway. Conversely, surely He would not grant our requests if the consequences would be negative for us. So what difference can our asking possibly make? Meaning, if we're not actually asking for something which is good, then surely He's not going to give it to us. So therefore, either way, if it's good, we'll get it anyway. And if it's not good, then surely we won't get it. Put differently, how can we hope to change Hashem's mind, as it were? If He's decided a certain thing is to be, how can we convince Him otherwise? If it's good and it will be, then it will be. If we could effect some change somehow, that would be nothing less than miraculous. He continues, second paragraph, if we cannot make any difference then by praying, why do we do it? Are we really expected to pour out our hearts in deeply felt pleading while knowing that our pleas can have no effect? Is that true, that all of that davening and that time that we spend really doesn't have an effect? Why are our prayers expressed as requests at all? If prayer is a meditation, a spiritual communion, it would seem that personal requests are an inappropriate medium. Surely deep personalized concentration would be better. You know, some form of meditation. This is what they do in other disciplines, other religions. They'll have some sort of meditation where they just connect with, some sort of Almighty on a very spiritual basis. Whereas we stand up with them, we say, please help me in my exam results. And I really need a new car, Hashem. And my neighbor's not feeling well. Please, can you help him? It seems like so mundane. It's so right? It's very, very down to earth. Let's see. If prayer is service, he says, asking for our needs seems quite the opposite. There are other paradoxical aspects of prayer, he says. The word tefillah, prayer, is based on a root which has two opposite meanings. Pilel has the connotation of the hope of completely unpredictable, illogical consequences occurring. It's almost something miraculous as pillah, great kindness being expressed despite circumstances suggesting otherwise, as it says with Yaakov Avinu says, Ra'oi fonecha lo pilalti, at the top of 101. I could never have hoped to see your face again. So pilalti is a wonder, it's an astonishment. Related to the word pele, a pele is a wonder. The words of Yaakov's wonder at seeing Yosef after so many years of separation. Yet, the same root means strict, deserved justice. Plili. An avon plili is in Hebrew, if you're in Israel, you get accused of that, then that means a criminal sin. That means that you've done something against the law, you've broken the law. Plili is justice in the narrow legal sense, which is the opposite of this unexpected bounty. How are these conflicting elements all contained in the word prayer? Meaning, if the prayer, which is the root pilel, can mean both this unexpected, beautiful gift, and it can also mean strict, harsh judgment, then tefillah must contain both of these elements. What does that mean? Perhaps an even deeper problem is this, he says. The Gemara says quite plainly that Hashem himself davens. Hashem, the one who has the power to grant all requests, the source and definition of reality is praying. We're forced to ask incredulously, to whom? How is it possible to understand this statement at all? Okay, so meaning to final, there's a lot of different questions here. Number one, what is the point of us asking things? If they're good for us, we'll get them anyway. If they're not good for us, then we won't. If we wanted to just connect to God, there are many ways of doing it, but what's the point of asking for all of these requests, which are seemingly unnecessary? Furthermore, tefillah seems to be a route which is paradoxical. On the one hand, it means an unexpected gift, something which is wondrous and that you hadn't expected to get. And on the other hand, it's strict, harsh judgment, only what you deserve to the letter of the law. Which one is it? And finally, the third question, already sort of group of questions, is what does it mean that God davens? If davening is asking for the things that we need from a higher power, a higher source, so God doesn't have a higher power, a higher source. God, for that matter, doesn't even have things that he needs. And therefore, how can we say, and we describe God as praying as davening? That's the question, three questions. Let's begin, page 101 in the middle, with a wonderful answer to the first set of questions we asked, those which pose the problem of somehow changing Hashem, which is an obvious impossibility. The key to this issue is to understand that prayer is not directed at changing Hashem at all. It is directed at changing you. By the way, just that one sentence, that's profound. Because very often we go into prayer with the idea of, we just got to set, a shopping list. If that, by the way, all too often I've met people who go into prayer without any idea of what they're doing, because, as one of us, Rav Shechter said to us today in school, he spoke about prayer, he spoke about tefillah, the Rosh Hashiva of YU, and someone said to him, do you have any advice? How is it, how are the girls meant to be able to appreciate their tefillah, their prayer? We daven in school every day, how are they meant to? He said, the first thing is to understand what you're saying. That's the most, it seems obvious, doesn't it? But the number of people that are davening, but have never looked across in their siddur, glanced to the English, to have a look and see what it is that they're saying, right? And as long as we've got that language barrier, we could be standing there and shockling away with great intent, with the knowledge that we're standing in front of God. And of course, there's merit to that. But nevertheless, without understanding what it is that we're requesting, at least, even if not every word, at least the general outline, which bracha is it that I'm saying and what is it referring to? Otherwise, we can find ourselves in the bracha of Go'al Yisrael, where we're talking about Hashem sort of, being kind to the Jewish people and rescuing us from our enemies. So a person could be thinking about Moshiach and the Geula, because he's made a mistake, mixed up those two things. So therefore, it's firstly just very important that we understand what it is that we're saying. Secondly, what he says here is a beautiful thing. It's not that prayer is directed at changing Hashem or Hashem's mind, but rather our prayer changes us. It's directed at changing ourselves. He continues, the idea is that the work of tefillah, which is known as avodah shebalev, the service of the heart, is work on the self. It's the effort to change the personality. It has been said if one takes 3 steps backwards at the end of davening and is not a different person, one has failed in that tefillah. I know that's setting the bar high, right? But nevertheless, it's essentially a reflective time for us to take stock of where we are up to. Am I in line with the things that I am saying? Are these truly my goals? Am I acting in the way that befits a person who is able to speak to Hashem directly, one-on-one? Work on the personality means making changes. Some refinement and elevation must occur. Now let's apply this idea to some of the specifics we mentioned. The reason we hope to achieve a result through tefillah to make some change in the world or our situation in it is as follows. We cannot convince God that we need some or other particular thing if he knows otherwise, page 102. But we can change ourselves to the point that the object of our request has a different meaning. If a person wants wealth, for example, but he's being refused it because it would be bad for him, then no amount of pleading will change that. But working on oneself until one reaches a refinement and insight into the purpose of life and the correct perspective on wealth could result in a situation where that now may be good for the person. Therefore, one can change the dispensation granted when we change ourselves. A new dispensation now becomes appropriate. Tefillah is not just a meditation, a communion. It's most certainly intended to produce results, meaning to produce changes and real changes in our lives. Of course, it is immediately apparent that the work of tefillah is not simply asking for things. It must be hard and sincere work indeed to change oneself genuinely. Meaning, what he's saying here, the fundamental principle is that very often in life, the reason why we're not getting something, the reason why there isn't this goodness which is coming from Shemayim towards us, is because we are not going to be able to use it in the correct way. It's because who I am at the moment is not a person that needs or deserves or will make the best use of the thing that I'm asking for. But when we go through that process of tefillah, that process of tefillah actually uplifts us, and then you end up becoming a different person. And even if it's not just in one davening, then it's over a period of time. But then you become a person who is worthy of receiving those things. You become a different person. And the person is now able to say, when Hashem gives me those gifts, whatever that might be, then in that case, I'm going to use them well. In that case, I'm going to use them for the best of my abilities. He continues, the very first change which occurs is in one's relationship with Hashem. Meaning without sort of thinking, when we think about changing ourselves and we think about, the anger problem or the getting up in the morning problem or the laziness problem or all of that sort of stuff, the first thing is just the relationship with Hashem. The act of asking puts us in the right perspective. One asks for a thing only from that which one believes to be a valid source. This change alone can result in one's receiving something which you wouldn't have received otherwise. The first element which Hashem desires from our tefillah is that we put ourselves in a position of asking. One of the girls came into me the other day and she said to me, am I allowed to daven that I get good results in my exams? And I said, of course you're allowed to daven that. She said, but surely davening should be something selfless. Shouldn't we be just davening for like other people and the rest of the world? We shouldn't be selfish when we're davening. Which I thought was a really kind of interesting perspective, right? And, coming from a very good place, a place of altruism. But I explained to her on the contrary. Hashem wants you to daven for your exams to go well. Hashem wants to hear what's bothering us in our lives. Hashem wants us to turn to Him. And it's the same thing as a parent, right? Parents don't like being nagged by their child for things, right? They don't like being, I need a new bike and I'm not, this teacher is not good in school and you have to do this and I want to go on holiday and that sort of thing. We don't enjoy that. There's one thing worse is if they would stop communicating completely. It's fine, I'm doing my own thing. Yeah, see you. I'm off, going off for the summer, going off to school, goodbye, not talking about it. That's far worse. Far worse. So Hashem says to us, I want you to talk to me. I want you to tell me about the troubles and the difficulties and the challenges and the aspirations and the desires and the longings and all of those things that you have in life, because that is a relationship. That means that you realize that I'm your Father in heaven and that I care about you. And therefore, just that act of sincerely turning to Hashem can actually have the power to make us a different person than when we started the tefillah, especially, by the way, when we're doing it in the middle of a busy day. In the middle of a busy working week, and a person takes time out, whether it's some time in the morning, whether it's some time in the middle of the day for a mincha, and a person takes some time out and says, you know what, I'm actually going to put everything else to one side, and the clients and the work and the internet and everything to one side, and I'm going to turn to Hashem instead. It's a powerful message for ourselves, let alone for anyone else. It's a very powerful message. This is important to me, and I need to ask Hashem. That makes a difference. I need to ask Hashem about this. He continues, we thereby acknowledge the source, automatically implying we will appreciate Hashem is the source when our request is granted. An analogy says, a father may be ready and willing to give his child some particular thing, but may be withholding it because his prime objective is the relationship between himself and his child. If the child were just to acknowledge his father as the giver, that may be all the father is waiting for. And therefore, maybe in life, sometimes, Hashem is just waiting for us to actually ask Him. He's waiting for us to ask Him. And that's all we have to do. And that itself is going to bring about that change within us. And therefore, it's going to bring about that we will be worthy of something that we weren't worthy of beforehand. I certainly just, sort of can't let the opportunity go past without mentioning just some thoughts about the incredibly hard week that we've had here in London. And one of the things, when I overcame the initial shock and definitely some anger that I had originally, when it happened yesterday, then coming back to school the next day and realizing that I have the incredible zechus and the privilege to be able to teach the next generation, to be able to bring up, the teenagers, the young children of the next generation in a way that's not pessimistic, in a way that's filled with hope for a better future, in a way that they're proud of who they are. They're proud to be Jewish. They realize it's an absolute gift what we've got. And the fact that other people in the world don't appreciate that doesn't make it any less of a gift and any less of a privilege. And I think this, when we're learning these chapters as well, these are the type of things which are obviously a lifetime's work. And I think all of us can admit to the fact that we find tefillah challenging. That's probably almost a universal thing. But when you see it in the perspective of, you mean I have an inner Ratzon, I have a Panemius. There's an inner part of myself which is so deep and it's so important to who I am as my identity. And the way to connect to that is my inner Ratzon. That's my inner will, my inner desire, my inner passion. And the purpose of tefillah, as we're going to see, is actually to be able to find a place where I can express, where I can connect, and I can work on that. And I have a system which has been built in by the creator of the world for me to be able to do that on a daily basis. And I have words that are going to help me in that siddur, which has been davened by Jews for thousands of years, that are going to help me and be able to do that work of working on my panemius and my inner work. It's an absolute privilege. It's an absolute privilege and a joy. And all I would say is that we have to dig deep within ourselves to make sure that we never forget that privilege that we have, to make sure that things like this only make us stronger and prouder to be and even more determined, I would say, to make sure that we are using it right, that we are doing it in the right way. Next week, I will not be here. I'm going to be in Poland because we have a trip. There will, please God, be a share, but it will be given by someone else. That completes our learning for today, and then we'll move on to say some